cave underwater, a locked gate meant to keep divers safe, and a man who vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only questions and the echo of rushing water. Before we descend into one of diving's most perplexing mysteries, I want to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your location and the time in the comments below. Are you in Florida, close to where this story unfolded? Perhaps you're in the UK, listening in the early morning hours? Or somewhere else entirely, letting the sound of rain and my voice carry you toward rest? Wherever you are, you're about to journey into the depths of a mystery that has haunted cave divers and investigators for over a decade. This is the story of Ben McDaniel, a 30-year-old man who entered an underwater cave in August 2010 and was never seen again. Not by his family, not by search and rescue teams, not by expert cave divers who risked their lives searching the depths. He simply vanished into the labyrinth of flooded passages beneath Vortex Spring, Florida, leaving behind equipment, questions, and a mystery that defies every logical explanation. Let the sound of rain outside blend with the rushing water in your mind as we explore this case. Get comfortable, close your eyes when you're ready, and let's begin at a peaceful spring in North Florida, where the water is crystal clear and the danger lies hidden below the surface. Vortex Spring is beautiful. Located in Ponce de Leon, Florida, about an hour from Panama City, it's a popular destination for swimmers, snorkelers, and scuba divers. The spring produces millions of gallons of crystal clear water daily. You can see down into the depths, watch fish swimming through shafts of sunlight. It looks inviting, safe, peaceful, but beneath that inviting surface lies a complex cave system. Dark passages that twist and turn through the limestone bedrock. Narrow passages where a diver's body barely fits. Sections where the ceiling is so low you have to remove your tank and push it ahead of you. Places where, if something goes wrong, you are miles from the surface, miles from air, miles from help. Cave diving is not like regular scuba diving. It's considered one of the most dangerous sports in the world. Even experienced divers die in caves, get disoriented in the darkness, stir up silt that makes the water opaque, run out of air before finding their way back. The statistics are grim. Cave diving deaths are not uncommon, despite extensive training requirements and strict safety protocols. Ben McDaniel knew this, or at least he should have. He'd taken up diving after a difficult period in his life. Born in Memphis, Tennessee, Ben had worked in his family's business. He'd been engaged to be married. Life seemed to be on a comfortable, predictable track. But then things fell apart. The engagement ended. The relationship with his family business became strained. Ben was adrift, searching for purpose, for meaning, for something to fill the emptiness he felt. He found scuba diving, or perhaps scuba diving found him. He took lessons, got certified, and he fell in love with the underwater world. The silence, the weightlessness, the way everything on the surface, all the problems and pressures, just faded away when he descended into the blue. By 2010, Ben had moved to the Gulf Coast of Florida. He was working at his family's beach condominium rental business, but his real passion was diving. He dove constantly, multiple times a week. He upgraded his certifications. He invested in better equipment, expensive equipment, top-of-the-line gear that marked him as someone serious about the sport. But here's the crucial thing about Ben McDaniel's diving credentials. He was not certified for cave diving. He had open water certifications. He could dive in the ocean, in lakes, in springs. But cave diving requires specialized training, unique skills, certifications that Ben had not obtained. This didn't stop him from diving in caves. Vortex Spring had become his favorite spot. He'd visited dozens of times. He knew the layout of the accessible areas. He'd gone deeper than his certifications allowed, pushing boundaries, testing limits. The staff at Vortex Spring knew him. They'd spoken to him about the danger, reminded him that cave diving without proper training was reckless. But Ben kept diving, kept pushing deeper. In the summer of 2010, Ben's life was at a crossroads. He owed money, He'd maxed out credit cards buying diving equipment. He'd borrowed from family. His father, Shelby McDaniel, would later say that Ben seemed troubled in the weeks before he disappeared. Not suicidal exactly, but lost. Searching for something. Running from something. August 18, 2010 started like many other days for Ben. He drove to Vortex Spring. It was a Wednesday, the middle of the week. Not particularly busy. He checked in at the dive shop, paid his entrance fee, geared up in the parking lot, his expensive equipment laid out carefully. Regulators, tanks, lights, the tools that would keep him alive in the underwater darkness. He entered the water around 7 in the evening. Other divers were there. They saw him descend, watched him disappear into the mouth of the cave. Just another dive. Just another evening exploring the depths. But Ben McDaniel never came back. He never emerged from that spring. And when the sun rose the next morning, his truck was still in the parking lot, his keys still inside it. Ben was gone, swallowed by Vortex Spring, vanished into the earth. When Ben didn't return that evening, the staff at Vortex Spring weren't immediately concerned. Sometimes divers stayed late. Sometimes they hung out after their dives, talking equipment and comparing experiences. But when his truck remained in the parking lot overnight, when morning came and there was still no sign of him, alarm bells started ringing. The owner of Vortex Spring, Lowell Kelly, knew something was wrong. He'd been in the diving business for years. He knew the cave system intimately, and he knew that when a diver doesn't come back, when their vehicle sits abandoned, it means one thing. There's been an accident. Someone is trapped in the cave. Someone is dead. Kelly immediately contacted authorities and assembled a search team. The Holmes County Sheriff's Office responded, but this wasn't a search they could conduct themselves. You can't just send deputies into an underwater cave system. You need experts, highly trained cave divers willing to risk their lives to search for someone who is almost certainly already dead. Within hours, some of the best cave divers in the world were converging on Vortex Spring. These weren't amateur enthusiasts. These were professionals, people who'd logged thousands of dives in cave systems around the globe, people who knew the dangers intimately and had the skills to navigate them. They entered the water, descended into the cave, and they began the painstaking, dangerous work of searching every passage, every crevice, every possible location where Ben's body might be. The Vortex Spring cave system is complex. From the main basin, the cave descends down to about 90 feet. There's a locked gate at this depth, installed specifically to prevent untrained divers from going deeper. Beyond the gate, the cave continues, narrows, becomes incredibly dangerous. The passages are tight. The water is dark beyond what recreational dive lights can penetrate. It's cold, disorienting, one of the most hazardous cave diving environments in Florida. The search divers checked the gate. It was locked, intact. According to the design of the system, Ben should be somewhere between the entrance and the gate. He shouldn't have been able to get past it. His body should be in that section of the cave, somewhere in those first 90 feet of depth. But he wasn't. They searched every inch, every side passage, every alcove, every crack large enough for a human body to enter. They brought in additional lights. They worked in shifts, team after team entering the water, searching, documenting, and finding nothing. Ben McDaniel was not in the cave, at least not in the accessible section, not in the area they could reach and search. He had vanished more completely than seemed possible. The search expanded. Teams checked beyond the locked gate. Lowell Kelly provided keys to the most experienced divers, allowing them to unlock the gate and search the deeper, more dangerous sections. These divers went places that would terrify most people. Passages so narrow they had to remove their tanks. Sections where the cave twisted back on itself. Places where the slightest mistake would be fatal. They found nothing. No body, no equipment, no sign that Ben had ever been there. One of the most experienced search divers was Eduardo Soriano. He went deeper into the Vortex Spring cave than perhaps anyone had gone before. He pushed the limits of safety, descending to depths where nitrogen narcosis begins to affect judgment, where the water pressure becomes crushing, where every minute requires precise decompression calculations on the return to avoid the bends. Soriano searched areas that were barely passages at all. Tight restrictions where he had to exhale completely just to squeeze through. And in these impossibly tight spaces, he found something. Marks on the walls. Scrapes that could have been made by a diver's tank. Fresh scrapes suggesting someone had recently forced their way through. Could Ben have made it through these restrictions? Could he have pushed deeper into the cave system than anyone thought possible? The idea seemed unlikely. Ben was not a small man. He was over 6 feet tall, solidly built. And he wasn't an experienced cave diver who would know how to navigate such tight spaces. But Soriano's findings suggested that someone or something had been in those deep passages recently. If it was Ben, if he'd somehow made it through the gate and through the restrictions, then his body could be anywhere in the unexplored depths beyond, in sections of the cave that no one had fully mapped, in places where the water was too dangerous for even expert rescue divers to search. The official search continued for days, then weeks, and it found nothing conclusive. Ben McDaniel had entered Vortex Spring on August 18, 2010. He had not exited, but he was not in the cave. At least, not anywhere searchers could find him. How does a person vanish from a cave system that has been thoroughly searched by experts? How does a body simply cease to exist? These questions haunted everyone involved in the search. Because in cave diving accidents, bodies are almost always recovered. The cave may kill you, but it doesn't usually make you disappear. As the search wound down without finding Ben's body, theories began to emerge. Because when the physical evidence doesn't provide answers, the human mind tries to fill in the gaps, to make sense of the impossible, to find explanations, even unlikely ones, rather than accept the unknown. Theory 1 was the simplest. Ben had drowned in the cave, and his body was trapped somewhere the searchers hadn't found, perhaps wedged in a tight passage, perhaps buried under silt or hidden in a side tunnel that had been missed. Caves are three-dimensional mazes. Even the most thorough search can miss things. But the divers who searched Vortex Spring were emphatic. They knew this cave. They'd searched every accessible passage multiple times. If Ben's body was in the searchable areas, they would have found it. The cave isn't infinite. It has limits, and those limits had been reached. Theory 2 was darker. Ben's body was in the unexplored sections beyond the safe diving areas. He'd somehow gotten through the gate and the restrictions. He'd pushed into the deep, unmapped passages. And there, in the darkness and cold, he'd become disoriented, run out of air, and died. His body remained in those depths, in places too dangerous for recovery. This theory had support from the scrape marks Eduardo Soriano found. But it had a major problem. How did Ben get through the locked gate? He didn't have a key. The gate was intact, locked when searchers first checked it. If Ben had cut through it or forced it open, there would be evidence of that. There wasn't. Some suggested Ben might have picked the lock. But cave diving while trying to pick an underwater lock in darkness with limited air while managing your equipment and buoyancy. It seemed nearly impossible, especially for someone without cave diving training. Theory 3 introduced human intervention. Someone helped Ben get through the gate. Perhaps Lowell Kelly, the owner of Vortex Spring, had given Ben a key, or perhaps another diver had been in the cave at the same time, someone with access who'd unlocked the gate and not mentioned it to authorities. This theory would explain how Ben got past the gate. But it raised new questions. Why would someone help him? Why would they keep silent after he disappeared? Why would they risk their business and reputation to allow an uncertified diver into a dangerous area? Theory 4 was more sinister. Foul play. Perhaps Ben hadn't died in the cave at all. Perhaps something had happened on the surface. Perhaps he'd been killed, and his body disposed of elsewhere, with the cave diving setup being an elaborate cover story. But who would kill Ben McDaniel? He had debts, yes, but not the kind that typically lead to murder. He had conflicts with family over money, but his family was desperately searching for him, offering rewards for information. If they were involved, They were giving Oscar-worthy performances of grief and confusion. The crime scene evidence didn't support murder either. Ben's truck was in the parking lot. His gear was gone, as it would be if he'd taken it into the water. There were witnesses who saw him enter the spring. No one saw anything suspicious. No altercation. No second vehicle. Nothing that suggested foul play. Theory 5 was the one Ben's family desperately wanted to believe. Ben was alive. He hadn't died in the cave. He'd staged his disappearance. Maybe he was overwhelmed by debt. Maybe he was running from something. Maybe he wanted a fresh start. He'd faked a cave diving accident and walked away from his life. This theory would explain why no body was found. Ben wasn't dead, so there was no body to find. But it had serious problems. How did he exit the spring without being seen? Multiple divers and staff were present. The area isn't remote. It's a commercial dive operation with people around. How do you climb out of the water, remove your gear, and disappear without anyone noticing? And where would he go? Ben didn't have significant cash. His credit cards were maxed out. He didn't have resources to start a new life somewhere else. Within days of his disappearance, his face was all over the news. National media covered the story. How do you vanish in the modern world with no money and your face on television? Yet his family clung to this possibility. His father, Shelby McDaniel, refused to believe Ben was dead. He hired private investigators. He offered a $10,000 reward for information about Ben's whereabouts. He gave interviews insisting that Ben was alive somewhere, that he'd come home when he was ready. It was the hope of a father who couldn't bear the alternative, who couldn't accept that his son was gone forever, and who could blame him. Without a body, without definitive proof of death, hope persists. However unlikely, however painful, we're halfway through Ben McDaniel's story now, deep in the mystery of how a man can vanish from a place that was thoroughly searched by experts. Whether you're still awake, contemplating the impossibility of it all, or whether you've drifted into sleep, I'm grateful you're here with me. For those still listening, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment with your location and the current time where you are. And tell me, what do you think happened to Ben McDaniel? Did he drown in an unexplored section of the cave? Did he stage his disappearance? Or is there some other explanation we haven't considered? If you're enjoying these deep dives into true mysteries, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button to help others discover these stories. We release new content every week, each one designed to accompany you through the quiet hours of the night, exploring the cases that haunt us, the mysteries that have no easy answers. Now, let's continue with the investigation, with the questions that began to swirl around Vortex Spring itself, and with the tragic attempts to find answers in those dark underwater passages. As weeks turned into months without finding Ben's body, attention began to focus on Vortex Spring itself, on the business, on the owner, Lowell Kelly, on the decisions made and the questions that had no satisfying answers. Lowell Kelly was an experienced diver and businessman. He'd owned Vortex Spring for years. It was his livelihood, his investment, his responsibility. And now a man had disappeared from his property, vanished in a way that seemed impossible, under circumstances that raised uncomfortable questions. Why had Ben been allowed to dive in the cave repeatedly without proper certification? Cave diving certification cards are easy to check. Any responsible dive operation should verify credentials before allowing access to dangerous areas. But Ben had been diving at Vortex Spring for months, going into the cave system, pushing beyond safe limits, and apparently no one had stopped him. Kelly's response was that Ben had shown certifications, that he'd seemed experienced and capable, that it wasn't his job to police every diver's decisions. Adults make their own choices. Adults accept their own risks. It's not a dive operator's responsibility to be a babysitter. But critics argued that cave diving is different. The dangers are so extreme, the fatality rate so high, that allowing untrained divers into caves is negligent at best, criminally irresponsible at worst. If Kelly had been strict about certifications, if he'd banned Ben from cave diving at Vortex Spring, Ben would still be alive. Then there were questions about the locked gate. Who had keys? How many copies existed? Could someone have accessed the area beyond the gate without Kelly's knowledge? Could Ben have somehow obtained a key? Kelly maintained that access to the area beyond the gate was strictly controlled. Only he and a few trusted, highly experienced divers had keys. The gate was checked regularly. It was secure. If Ben had gotten past it, Kelly didn't know how. But some investigators weren't satisfied. They questioned whether the gate had really been locked on the night Ben disappeared, whether someone might have left it open by accident, whether Kelly himself might know more than he was saying. The suspicions grew darker. Some theorized that Kelly might have been involved in Ben's disappearance more directly. Perhaps there'd been a confrontation. Perhaps Kelly had finally decided to ban Ben from the property, and things had escalated. Perhaps Ben's body wasn't in the cave at all, but had been disposed of elsewhere, with the cave diving scenario being a cover-up. These theories painted Kelly as a killer, someone who'd murdered a customer and staged an elaborate accident. But there was no evidence, no witnesses to any confrontation, no motive that made sense. Kelly's business depended on safety and reputation. A death on his property was the last thing he wanted. Why would he risk everything to harm Ben McDaniel? Another possibility emerged that was less sinister but equally troubling. Financial motivation for Kelly to keep the truth hidden. If it became known that Vortex Springs safety protocols were lax, that uncertified divers were routinely allowed into dangerous areas, the business could be ruined. Lawsuits could follow. Insurance could be revoked. Kelly's livelihood would be destroyed. Did Kelly have a reason to downplay what had happened? To insist that Ben must have somehow gotten into restricted areas without his knowledge? To avoid admitting that his operation had been negligent? It's possible. But it doesn't explain where Ben's body actually was. The McDaniel family hired a private investigator, Charlie Dodson. Dodson was experienced, thorough, and he had resources to conduct his own investigation independent of local authorities. He interviewed witnesses. He examined the physical evidence. He hired expert divers to research sections of the cave. And Dodson came to believe that something was wrong at Vortex Spring. Not necessarily murder, not necessarily a cover-up. But something wasn't right. The story didn't add up. Too many questions had convenient non-answers. Too many possibilities had been dismissed too quickly. Dodson theorized that Ben might have been in deeper sections of the cave than official searchers claimed was possible. That perhaps the cave system was more extensive than anyone acknowledged. That there might be unmapped passages where a body could remain hidden. But even this theory had problems. Other expert cave divers, independent of Kelly and Vortex Spring, had also searched the cave. They'd found nothing. Were they all wrong? All missing something? Or was the truth something else entirely? In 2011, a year after Ben disappeared, the case took a strange turn. A man named Kelly McGuire came forward claiming he'd been offered $10,000 to kill Ben McDaniel. According to McGuire, someone had approached him before Ben's disappearance with the murder-for-hire plot. He'd refused. But now, with Ben missing, he felt he should come forward. Investigators looked into McGuire's claims. They found no evidence to support them, no witnesses to the alleged conversation, no record of payments or arrangements. McGuire himself had credibility problems. He was facing his own legal troubles. Some believed he was making up the story for attention or to work an angle with his own case. The murder-for-hire claim went nowhere. But it added another layer of confusion to a case already drowning in theories and possibilities. Who would want Ben McDaniel dead? His family? Unlikely, given their desperate search for him. A creditor? Over credit card debt? It didn't make sense. And how would a murder-for-hire plot connect to Ben disappearing in a cave? The more investigators dug, the more complicated and confusing the case became. Every answer led to new questions. Every theory had fatal flaws. Ben McDaniel had vanished into an impossibility, and no amount of investigation could explain how or why. Ben's father, Shelby McDaniel, refused to give up. In 2012, nearly 2 years after Ben's disappearance, he took an extraordinary and controversial step. He hired a highly experienced cave diver named David Tomlinson to conduct what he hoped would be the definitive search of Vortex Spring. Tomlinson was one of the best. He'd been diving in caves for decades. He'd recovered bodies from cave systems before. He'd been deeper and gone further than almost anyone. If anyone could find Ben McDaniel in the unexplored depths beyond the gate, it was David Tomlinson. Tomlinson accepted the job. He knew the risks. He knew that searching the deepest, most dangerous sections of Vortex Spring could kill him. But he also knew the pain of a family without answers. And he believed he might find what others had missed. In March 2012, Tomlinson entered Vortex Spring. He went past the locked gate. He descended into the deep passages. He pushed through the tight restrictions where Eduardo Soriano had found the scrape marks. And he went further, deeper, into sections of the cave that appeared on no maps, that had never been fully explored. The water at those depths is cold, dark beyond imagination. The pressure affects your body and your mind. Nitrogen narcosis can make you feel drunk, can impair judgment, can make you believe things that aren't true. Every minute at extreme depth shortens your bottom time, increases the decompression obligation on the way back up. Stay too long and you won't have enough air to safely return to the surface. Tomlinson searched for hours. He found passages, dead ends, tight squeezes. He found places where silt hung in the water like fog, where visibility dropped to zero, where he had to feel his way forward in absolute darkness. He found areas where the cave narrowed until even he, experienced as he was, questioned whether he should continue. But he did not find Ben McDaniel. No body, no equipment, no sign that Ben had ever been in those deep passages. The scrape marks that had seemed so promising led to nothing. Dead ends. Restrictions too tight for a human body. The cave seemed to be playing tricks, suggesting possibilities that didn't actually exist. Tomlinson emerged after his search. He reported his findings to the McDaniel family. He'd been further into Vortex Spring than perhaps anyone had ever gone. And Ben wasn't there. If Ben had died in the cave, if his body was in the water, Tomlinson believed he would have found him. The implications were troubling. If expert searchers had covered every accessible inch of the cave, if even the most dangerous deep passages had been checked, and there was still no sign of Ben, then either he'd never entered the cave that day or something else had happened. Something that didn't involve drowning in the underwater passages. But the evidence clearly showed Ben had entered the water. Witnesses saw him. His gear was gone. His truck was in the parking lot. He went into Vortex Spring. Where he went from there remained the mystery. More searches followed. In 2013, 2014, 2015, divers continued to explore Vortex Spring. Some were hired by the McDaniel family. Others were independent researchers, cave diving experts who couldn't let the mystery rest. The case had become something of an obsession in the cave diving community. A puzzle that begged to be solved. Each search found nothing. The cave had swallowed Ben McDaniel and refused to give him back. Or perhaps he'd never been swallowed at all. Perhaps the answer lay somewhere else entirely. Somewhere no one had thought to look because everyone was so focused on the cave. In 2016, another experienced cave diver, Ed Sorensen, conducted his own search. Sorensen was a legend in cave diving circles. He'd recovered more bodies from underwater caves than perhaps anyone alive. He ran a recovery service. He knew every trick, every technique for finding the unfindable in flooded passages. Sorensen spent days at Vortex Spring. He used sonar. He used specialized cameras. He checked areas that previous searchers had claimed were too tight or too dangerous to access. And like everyone before him, he found nothing. After his search, Sorensen made a statement that sent shockwaves through the diving community and the McDaniel family. He said, in his professional opinion, Ben McDaniel's body was not in Vortex Spring, had never been in the cave system. Whatever had happened to Ben, it didn't happen in the underwater passages. Sorensen's conclusion was based on years of experience. He knew how bodies behave in underwater caves. He knew where they get trapped, how they settle, where they hide. And he was convinced that if Ben had drowned in Vortex Spring, his body would have been found by now. The fact that it hadn't been found meant it wasn't there to find. So if Ben didn't drown in the cave, what happened to him? This question brought investigators and the family back to all the alternatives they'd been avoiding. Staging a disappearance, foul play, some scenario that didn't involve the cave system at all, despite all evidence suggesting Ben had entered the water that August evening. Today, more than 14 years after Ben McDaniel vanished, the case remains unsolved. His body has never been found. No definitive evidence has emerged to explain what happened. The spring continues to flow, crystal clear and beautiful, holding its secrets. Vortex Spring still operates as a dive site. Lowell Kelly continued to run the business until his death in 2013. The locked gate remains in place. New warning signs have been added, emphasizing the dangers of cave diving without proper training. But the mystery of Ben McDaniel still hangs over the location like a shadow. Ben's father, Shelby McDaniel, never stopped searching. He spent hundreds of thousands of dollars hiring investigators, funding searches, pursuing leads. He never accepted that Ben was dead. He held on to hope that somewhere, somehow, his son was alive. That one day Ben would come home. Shelby McDaniel died in 2013 without ever learning what happened to his son. He went to his grave still searching, still hoping, still believing that answers existed somewhere. It was a tragic end to a tragedy. A father who couldn't let go of his child even after that child had let go of the world. Ben's mother, Patty, continues to hope. She maintains that Ben is alive somewhere, that he'll come back when he's ready, that the right piece of information will emerge and bring him home. It's a mother's love that refuses to acknowledge the impossible, that insists on hope even when hope defies logic. The theories persist. Online forums dedicated to the case continue to debate what happened. New armchair investigators discover the case every year and propose new solutions. Some believe Ben staged his disappearance and is living under a new identity. Some believe he died in the cave and the searchers simply missed his body. Some believe something more sinister occurred. The most likely explanation, according to most investigators who've worked the case, is that Ben did die in Vortex Spring. That he got past the gate somehow, perhaps through pure determination and risk-taking, perhaps by picking the lock, perhaps through some other means no one has identified. That he pushed into the deep, dangerous passages. That he became disoriented, ran out of air, or got trapped in a tight restriction. And that his body is in some unexplored section of the cave, in a passage too dangerous or too difficult for even expert searchers to access. This explanation accounts for the evidence. Ben entered the water. He didn't exit. He must be in the cave. The fact that he hasn't been found simply means the cave is hiding him well, not that he isn't there. But this explanation requires accepting that every expert who searched, including people who'd recovered bodies from impossible locations before, all missed Ben. That the cave defeated the best divers in the world. That somewhere in those flooded passages, in the cold and dark, Ben McDaniel's body rests in a place no living person may ever reach. The alternative explanations all require accepting things that seem even less likely. That Ben staged an elaborate disappearance with no resources and no plan. That he was murdered with no motive and no evidence. That something occurred that left no traces, no witnesses, no clues. Cave diving experts use Ben's case as a cautionary tale. An example of what happens when you dive beyond your training. When you take risks in environments that don't forgive mistakes. When you push limits in places where pushing limits equals death. Ben McDaniel wanted to explore, wanted to go deeper, wanted to see what was beyond the locked gate, beyond the restrictions, beyond the safe areas. And that desire, that curiosity, that need to push boundaries may have cost him everything. Or perhaps it didn't. Perhaps somewhere Ben is alive, living a different life, carrying the knowledge of what really happened that August evening. Perhaps the truth is simpler or stranger than anyone has theorized. Perhaps we'll never know. Closing 58:00-60:00. The water continues to flow from Vortex Spring. Crystal clear, beautiful, inviting, Thousands of people dive there every year without incident. They swim in the basin, explore the safe areas, and emerge back into the sunlight, their adventure complete. But some still wonder about the depths, about the passages beyond the locked gate, about what lies in the darkness where the light can't reach. And they wonder about Ben McDaniel, the man who went into those depths and never came back. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, through the descent into mystery and the failure to find answers, thank you. These unsolved cases are the hardest to tell because they don't give us the closure we crave. But they remind us that some mysteries remain mysteries, that some questions have no answers, that sometimes people vanish and we never know why. Before you drift fully into sleep, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment with your location and the current time where you are. Tell me what you think happened to Ben McDaniel. And if you're a diver, tell me about your experiences, your thoughts on cave diving, your perspective on this case. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button. Share this video with others who appreciate true mysteries and unsolved cases. We release new every week, stories to accompany you through the quiet hours, mysteries to ponder as you drift toward dreams. Sleep well, and if you ever find yourself at a beautiful spring, tempted to dive into the depths, remember Ben McDaniel. Remember that some places hold more danger than they show. That some depths are best left unexplored. That coming back to the surface is always more important than seeing what lies below. Story 2. September 14th, 2007. A 14-year-old boy leaves his home in South Yorkshire. He boards a train to London. He walks into King's Cross Station, and he is never seen again. Before we begin this journey into one of the United Kingdom's most haunting missing persons cases, I want to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your location and the current time in the comments. Are you in the UK, perhaps near where Andrew once lived? Are you across the ocean in North America, listening in the early morning hours? Wherever you are, you're about to hear the story of a boy who vanished in broad daylight in one of the most surveilled cities in the world, leaving behind questions that echo through nearly 2 decades. This is the story of Andrew Gosden, a brilliant, quiet boy who loved mathematics and music, who had his whole life ahead of him, who walked out his front door one morning with a plan known only to him, and was swallowed by the anonymity of London. His family has searched for him every single day since. Police have followed thousands of leads, but Andrew has never been found, never contacted anyone, never left a trace beyond those few hours on September 14th, 2007. Let the sound of the rain outside blend with your thoughts as we explore this case. Get comfortable. Close your eyes when you're ready, and let's begin with an ordinary Friday morning that would become anything but ordinary. Andrew Paul Gosden was born on July 10th, 1993 in Doncaster, South Yorkshire. He was the youngest of 2 sons born to Kevin and Glenys Gosden. By all accounts, he was a bright, happy child. Gifted, actually. The kind of student teachers remember fondly. The kind of boy who excelled without apparent effort. Andrew attended Macaulay Catholic High School in Doncaster. He was in year 10, what Americans would call the 9th grade. He was 14 years old, but mature for his age in many ways. He read advanced books. He played the piano. He was particularly talented at mathematics and had been placed in the gifted and talented program at his school. But Andrew wasn't just academically brilliant. He had interests that seemed perfectly normal for a teenager in 2007. He loved video games, particularly the PlayStation 2. He enjoyed watching wrestling. He was a fan of the band Slipknot and other alternative music. He read books voraciously, everything from fantasy novels to scientific texts. Those who knew Andrew described him as quiet, introverted, the kind of boy who was more comfortable with a small group of close friends than in large social settings. He wasn't bullied at school, but he wasn't particularly popular either. He existed in that middle space, content with his own company, focused on his interests. His family was close-knit. His father, Kevin, worked as a speech therapist. His mother, Glenys, was a teaching assistant. His older brother was at university. They lived in Balby, a suburb of Doncaster. A normal family. A loving family. The kind of family where a child going missing seemed impossible. In the weeks before September 14th, 2007, Andrew seemed completely normal. There were no warning signs, no behavioral changes, no indication that anything was wrong. He attended school regularly. He did his homework. He practiced piano. He played video games with his friends. If something was troubling him, if he was planning something, he gave no indication to anyone around him. September 14th, 2007 was a Friday, the last day of the school week. Andrew woke up that morning in his home on Gosden Avenue. He got ready for school as he always did. He wore his school uniform, a black shirt and trousers. He packed his school bag. His father, Kevin, had the day off work. He was doing some gardening, getting ready to wash the family car. Andrew came downstairs. It was just after 8 in the morning. Kevin asked Andrew if he wanted a lift to school. Andrew said no, he'd walk as usual. It was about a 20-minute walk from their house to Macaulay Catholic High School. Nothing unusual about that. Andrew left the house around 8:05 a.m. He walked out the door, turned left, started walking in the direction of his school. His father watched him go, not knowing it would be the last time he'd see his son. Not knowing that Andrew had no intention of going to school that day. That Andrew had a plan. A plan that would take him to London and into a mystery that has never been solved. At 8:31 a.m., just 26 minutes after leaving his house, Andrew Gosden walked into Doncaster railway station. He was wearing his school uniform, carrying his school bag, but he wasn't going to school. He was going somewhere else. Somewhere he'd apparently been planning to go, though he told no one about it. Andrew approached the ticket counter. He asked for a one-way ticket to London. Just one way, not a return. The ticket clerk asked him his age. Andrew said he was 14. The clerk quoted him the price for a return ticket, which was actually cheaper than a one-way due to off-peak pricing. But Andrew insisted on a one-way ticket. He paid in cash, £31.40. Money he'd withdrawn from his bank account at some point before that morning. The clerk sold him the ticket. There was nothing suspicious about a teenager traveling to London. It wasn't illegal. Andrew seemed calm, confident, like he knew what he was doing. The clerk had no reason to question it further or to contact anyone. At 9:35 a.m., Andrew boarded the 9:35 a.m. train from Doncaster to King's Cross Station in London. He took a seat. The train pulled away from the station, and Andrew Gosden began a journey that would end in his complete disappearance. The train from Doncaster to King's Cross takes approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes. It's a direct route, straightforward. Thousands of people make this journey every day for work, for leisure, for 100 different reasons. Andrew sat somewhere on that train for over 2 hours, traveling the 150 miles from his home to the heart of London. What was he thinking during that journey? Was he excited? Nervous? Was he meeting someone? Going to see something specific? Or was he running away from something in Doncaster, seeking escape in the anonymity of a big city? We don't know. Andrew didn't speak to fellow passengers that anyone remembers. He didn't make himself memorable. He simply rode the train like any other passenger, a boy in a school uniform heading to London on a Friday morning. The train arrived at King's Cross Station at 11:20 a.m. CCTV footage, which would later become crucial to the investigation, captured Andrew walking through King's Cross. The timestamp shows 11:25 a.m., 5 minutes after the train arrived. In the footage, Andrew is wearing his school uniform, black shirt, black trousers. He's carrying his school bag. He looks like any teenage boy. He doesn't look distressed. He doesn't look like he's running from something or toward something dangerous. He just looks like Andrew, calm, purposeful, walking with the crowd. The CCTV shows him walking through the main concourse of King's Cross Station. He exits the station, steps out onto the London streets, and then nothing. The camera footage ends. Andrew Gosden walks out of King's Cross Station and vanishes. That's the last confirmed sighting of Andrew Gosden. 11:25 a.m. on September 14th, 2007. A 14-year-old boy in a school uniform walking out of one of the busiest train stations in one of the most surveilled cities in the world. And after that moment, despite millions of CCTV cameras throughout London, despite thousands of people on the streets, despite every technological advantage of modern society, Andrew simply ceased to exist in any recordable way. He didn't use his bank card. He didn't use his phone, though actually, Andrew had left his phone at home that morning. He didn't contact anyone. He didn't plan for. If you're finding comfort in these stories, if they're helping you through the night, please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit that like button to help others discover these cases. We release new true crime stories every week, each one researched and told with respect for the victims and their families. Your support helps us continue this work. Now, let's continue with the theories, the alleged sightings, and the heartbreak of a family that has never stopped searching. When a child goes missing, especially a child like Andrew who left no note, made no concerning statements, showed no warning signs, investigators have to consider every possibility. Some are heartbreaking, some are hopeful. All of them are theories built on the foundation of almost no concrete evidence. Theory 1. Andrew ran away to start a new life. Perhaps he was unhappy in ways his family didn't recognize. Perhaps he felt trapped by expectations, by the pressure to succeed academically, by something in his life that he couldn't voice. Perhaps London represented freedom, anonymity, a chance to be someone else. This theory would explain why he bought a one-way ticket, why he left his phone behind so he couldn't be tracked, why he took cash but left everything else that connected him to his old life. But it struggles to explain how a 14-year-old boy with limited funds survived in London for any length of time. Where would he sleep? How would he eat? Andrew had maybe 200 pounds with him at most. That wouldn't last long in an expensive city. And if he'd run away to start over, why has he never been spotted? Never used his national insurance number? Never needed medical care? Never been picked up by police or social services? In modern Britain, it's incredibly difficult to exist completely off the grid, especially for a child. Theory 2. Andrew was meeting someone in London, someone he'd connected with online despite the lack of evidence on his computer. Someone who'd groomed him, convinced him to come to London, promised him something: friendship, belonging, something a quiet, introverted teenager might be seeking. This is the theory that terrifies Andrew's parents most. Because if Andrew was meeting someone, if he was lured to London, then what happened after 11:25 a.m. that morning was likely something terrible. Grooming, abduction, exploitation, murder. All the nightmares parents have about predators and vulnerable children. The problem with this theory is the same as before: no evidence, no online communications, no suspicious contacts. Police forensic teams examined Andrew's computer and found nothing. It's possible he used computers elsewhere, at school or at a library, and was careful to cover his tracks. But that level of sophistication seems unlikely for a 14-year-old. Theory 3. Andrew went to London for a specific reason, a concert or event, and something happened to him while he was there. Something unplanned. An accident, an attack, a chance encounter that went wrong. Andrew was a fan of alternative music. In September 2007, there were concerts happening in London. Some investigators theorized that Andrew might have wanted to see a band play, maybe Slipknot or another group he liked, and didn't tell his parents because he knew they wouldn't allow it. He went to London for the day, planning to return that evening, but something went wrong. This theory explains the one-way ticket. Andrew might have planned to buy a return ticket at King's Cross or buy one later for the journey home. It explains why he seemed calm and purposeful. He was just going to a concert, something he saw as an adventure, not dangerous. But if this was the case, where are the witnesses? Someone must have seen him at a concert venue. And what happened that prevented him from coming home? Did he get lost? Did someone harm him? Did he have an accident? Without evidence, this theory is just speculation. Theory 4. Andrew was suffering from mental health issues that no one recognized. Depression, perhaps, or suicidal ideation. He went to London with the intention of ending his life, choosing to do it away from home so his family wouldn't have to find him. This is a painful theory for Andrew's family to consider. They insist Andrew was happy, that there were no signs of depression or suicidal thoughts. But mental health issues in teenagers can be hidden, especially in young people who are intelligent and capable of masking their pain. The problem with this theory is practical. If Andrew intended to take his own life, his body should have been found. London is densely populated and thoroughly surveilled. A body would be discovered relatively quickly in most scenarios. The fact that Andrew simply vanished without a trace doesn't fit this theory well. Theory 5. Andrew had a secret life or interest that he was exploring in London. Perhaps he was questioning his sexuality and went to London to visit an area where he could explore that safely. Perhaps he had an interest or hobby that he kept hidden from his family and friends. Perhaps London offered something he couldn't find in Doncaster. This theory is based on the idea that teenagers often have internal lives that parents don't fully understand. That Andrew, for all his closeness with his family, might have been struggling with questions about identity, sexuality, or belonging that he couldn't voice. But again, where's the evidence? If Andrew was exploring London for personal reasons, he still should have come home or been spotted or left some trace of his presence beyond those few minutes at King's Cross. The truth is, none of these theories fully explains what happened. Each one has elements that make sense and elements that don't. Andrew Gosden remains a mystery because the facts we have are so limited. We know he went to London. We know he arrived. And then we know nothing. The gap between what we know and what we need to know is vast, and no theory has yet bridged it successfully. Over the years since Andrew's disappearance, there have been numerous reported sightings. Each one brings a surge of hope to his family. Each one is investigated by police, and each one, so far, has led nowhere conclusive. In September 2007, just days after Andrew disappeared, a witness came forward claiming to have seen him in a Pizza Hut in London. The witness was certain. The boy looked exactly like Andrew, same age, same appearance. He was with two other people, adults, and seemed uncomfortable. The witness didn't approach but reported it to police after seeing Andrew's photo in the news. Police investigated. They checked CCTV from the Pizza Hut. The footage was reviewed frame by frame, and they found nothing. No sign of Andrew. The witness had been mistaken, or the footage didn't capture the area where they had been sitting, or the time frame was wrong. Whatever the reason, this lead evaporated like so many others. In 2008, a year after Andrew disappeared, there was a reported sighting at a Covent Garden market. Again, someone was certain they'd seen him. Again, investigation led nowhere. The problem with sightings is that Andrew looked like a lot of teenage boys. Brown hair, glasses, average height, average build. Without distinctive features or marks, visual identification alone isn't enough. In 2009, police received information about a young man living rough in the Southwark area of London who matched Andrew's description. Officers tracked down this individual, hoping against hope that they'd found Andrew. But it was someone else. Another boy with his own tragic story, but not Andrew Gosden. The years passed. 2010, 2011, 2012. Andrew's image was age progressed, showing what he might look like at 16, at 18, at 20. His parents released these images on each anniversary of his disappearance. They gave interviews. They appeared on television programs. They never gave up hope that someone, somewhere, would recognize their son. In 2014, 7 years after Andrew disappeared, there was a significant development. A young man named Kevin Chadwick wrote to the Gosden family claiming that he was Andrew. He said he'd run away, had been living in London, and was ready to come home. The family's hearts must have stopped. 7 years of waiting, 7 years of wondering, and now this. But police investigated and quickly determined that Chadwick was not Andrew Gosden. He was a troubled young man who, for reasons known only to him, had falsely claimed to be the missing boy. It's unclear whether he was seeking attention, had mental health issues, or simply made a cruel joke. But it wasn't Andrew. The hope that had flared so brightly was extinguished again. There have been other false leads over the years, people claiming to have information, anonymous tips that lead to nothing. psychics offering their services, which the family politely declined. The investigation continued, but the trail had long since gone cold. In 2016, South Yorkshire Police announced they were scaling back the active investigation. This didn't mean giving up, but rather acknowledging the reality that without new evidence, without fresh leads, there was little they could do. The case remained open. Any new information would be investigated. But the daily search, the constant following of leads that had to end. Andrew's family refused to scale back their efforts. Kevin Gosden, Andrew's father, became a tireless advocate for missing children. He worked with charities. He spoke at events. He kept Andrew's case in the public eye, knowing that awareness was the only weapon they had against forgetting. Then, in 2021, 14 years after Andrew disappeared, something happened. Police arrested 2 men, both from the Lincolnshire area, on suspicion of kidnapping and human trafficking. The arrests were in connection with Andrew's disappearance. This was the first time police had made arrests in the case. The first time there was concrete action suggesting they might have a lead. The 2 men were released on bail pending further investigation. Police searched properties. They examined evidence. And then silence. No charges were brought. The investigation continued, but whatever led police to those 2 men either didn't pan out or didn't provide enough evidence to proceed. This development gave the Gosden family renewed hope. It suggested that police had information they hadn't shared publicly, that perhaps, after all these years, there was a break in the case. But as months passed without further arrests or announcements, that hope became complicated again by uncertainty. As of now, the 2 men who were arrested have not been charged. The investigation continues. Police have said they're following several lines of inquiry. But Andrew remains missing. His whereabouts remain unknown, and his family continues to wait for answers that may never come. Kevin and Glenys Gosden's lives stopped on September 14, 2007. Or rather, they split into 2 timelines, before Andrew disappeared and after. The before time seems like a dream now, a different life where they had 2 sons, where the future was predictable, where the worst thing they could imagine was far less terrible than what actually happened. In the after time, every birthday without Andrew is agony. Every Christmas with an empty seat at the table. Every milestone he should have reached, graduating school, learning to drive, perhaps going to university, perhaps falling in love, all of it exists only as painful imagination. Kevin has become the public face of the search for Andrew. He speaks at conferences about missing children. He works with charities like Missing People and the National Crime Agency. He gives interviews every year on the anniversary of Andrew's disappearance, ensuring that his son's face remains in the public consciousness. He's aged visibly over the years. The photographs from 2007 show a younger man, hopeful despite the tragedy. Recent photographs show the weight of 17 years of not knowing, of false hopes and dead ends, of possibilities that are too terrible to fully contemplate but impossible to ignore. Glenys has remained more private, but the pain is no less visible. In the few interviews she's given, she speaks of Andrew in the present tense, as if he might walk through the door at any moment. She keeps his room as it was, his books, his games, his piano, waiting for him. Andrew's brother has grown up in the shadow of his missing sibling. He was at university when Andrew disappeared. Now he's an adult, living his own life, but forever marked by the absence of his younger brother. He rarely speaks publicly about Andrew, but his family says the loss weighs on him constantly. The Gosden family has spent hundreds of thousands of pounds searching for Andrew. Private investigators, awareness campaigns, travel costs to follow up leads. It's bankrupted them emotionally and financially, but they can't stop. What parent could? What parent could ever give up searching for their child? They've learned to live with ambiguity. Andrew is neither definitively alive nor definitively dead. He exists in a state of quantum uncertainty, both possible outcomes existing simultaneously until some evidence collapses the probability wave into a single reality. And until that happens, his family exists in that terrible liminal space. Unable to grieve fully because there's still hope, unable to hope fully because there's been no contact in 17 years. The statistics on missing children are sobering. Most who are going to be found are found within the first few days. After the first week, chances drop dramatically. After the first year, recovery becomes increasingly unlikely. After 17 years, the odds approach zero. But odds aren't certainties. Children have been found after decades. Elizabeth Smart was found after 9 months. J.C. Dugard after 18 years. Sean Hornbeck after 4 years. It's rare, but it happens. And as long as it's possible, even remotely possible, the Gosden family will continue to hope and search. It's been nearly 18 years since Andrew Gosden walked out of King's Cross Station and vanished into London. 18 years of questions without answers. 18 years of a family searching for their son. 18 years of a mystery that has touched thousands of people who've followed the case, who've shared his image, who've hoped alongside his family that one day, somehow, Andrew would be found. If Andrew is alive, he would be 31 years old now. Old enough to have built an entire adult life. Old enough to have forgotten large portions of his childhood, or to have constructed a new identity so complete that Andrew Gosden no longer exists even in his own mind. Or old enough to be holding onto his identity, waiting for the right moment to reach out, to come home, to explain what happened that September day in 2007. If Andrew is not alive, if something terrible happened to him in London, then somewhere his family's nightmare has an answer, even if it's an answer they don't want to hear. Somewhere the truth exists, waiting to be discovered. Piece of evidence, confession, something that will finally bring closure, however painful. If you've stayed with me through Andrew's entire story, thank you. Thank you for keeping his memory alive. Thank you for being part of the vast network of people who still care, who still wonder, who still hope. Before you drift fully into sleep, please take a moment to comment below. Share your location and the time where you are. Share your thoughts about Andrew's case. And if you've found value in this story, in the way we've explored this mystery together, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button. Share this video with others who care about missing persons cases, who believe that every missing child deserves to be remembered and searched for. These stories matter. Andrew matters. And by listening, by remembering, by sharing, you're helping to ensure that he's not forgotten. That somewhere someone might see his face, might remember something, might provide the piece of information that finally brings him home. Sleep well. And if you happen to be in London, if you walk through King's Cross Station, take a moment to remember a 14-year-old boy who walked out of there in 2007 and was never seen again. Remember Andrew Gosden, and keep hoping, as his family does, that one day the mystery will be solved. Good night.